This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you're watching Fault Lines. In the previous program, you watched our exclusive conversation with Dr. Asad Majid Khan, who's Pakistan's ambassador in the United States. During my visit to Washington, D.C., I had the privilege of speaking with Mr. Richard Olson. Mr. Richard Olson has remained United States ambassador in Pakistan, special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan region, and currently working as senior associate with the United States Institute of Peace. Mr. Olson has a good command over the regional issues. And while advising USIP, he's very current on the issues related with our region. Watch this conversation before I bring my second guest in the program. Ambassador, the feeling in Pakistan is that the situation between the two countries, or the diplomatic relationship between the two countries, is on a downhill. And it is not comparable to the time when you were there in the office. Do you agree with this statement?
Well, the relationship between the United States and Pakistan has always been up and down. And I think the reason for that, for much of the past 20 years at least, is that we have been working at cross purposes in Afghanistan. The U.S. has been supportive of the regime in Kabul and has been fighting a counterterrorism mission and building up support for the Afghan army and the Afghan government. And the government of Pakistan, while supporting those goals in principle, was also at least allowing the Taliban to operate from Pakistani territory. So we were working at strategic cross purposes, and it was a complicated situation, and the relationship would improve or go down based on particular circumstances at the time. However, I would say that over the last 2 years, there has been a greater alignment between the United States and Pakistan because the United States has been aggressively pursuing a peace process in Afghanistan. So that has brought a degree of convergence between us, although there are still areas of divergence, especially on nuclear weapons and potentially other issues in the future.
Ambassador, you have mentioned Pakistan's nuclear weapon, and I understand this is a major concern for United States, or it has remained to be a much propagated concern of United States. But recently, I mean just in the last 1 month, there have been 2 separate incidents of nuclear theft, or the theft of uranium, enrichable uranium, in India. But instead of raising any concerns anywhere, we see a silence in the power corridors of United States, United Nations, and even the international nuclear regulators have not taken any action on that. How do you see this development?
Well, I'm afraid I don't know any details about uranium having been taken in India, so I can't offer any comment on that. The concern that the United States has had with regard to Pakistan is the expansion of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. I mean, the United States accepts that Pakistan has a reason for wanting a strategic deterrence, but it has concerns about the size of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal and the direction in which it may be heading in terms of the specific types of weaponry. So it's a narrower issue, not a broad issue.
Ambassador, I found you very appreciative of the role of Pakistan. But tell me, how would you see the situation if things do not go well from this point onward in Afghanistan? How would you see this from the spectrum of Pakistan?
I think that there has, as I said at the outset, been a degree of alignment with the United States, and there certainly have been steps that Pakistan has taken to facilitate the process. I would say the main one was the release of Mullah Baradar, who became the head of the Pakistan negotiating delegation and constituted an authorized representative for Ambassador Khalilzad to negotiate with. That was important. I think quietly Pakistan has used influence with the Taliban. I suspect the fact that the Taliban has not attacked the United States as it is withdrawing its forces, even after the May 1st deadline, is an indication of some restraint that I suspect is coming from Pakistan. So I think Pakistan does have influence and can use its influence with the Taliban. I think that now is the time for that influence to be used in favor of reaching a political settlement in Afghanistan. Because, as I say, Pakistan will bear the consequences if there is no political settlement, much more, frankly, in some ways, than the United States.
Ambassador, how do you see the developing gap between the two governments? And I say that because the two head of the states have not spoken to each other as yet. Senator John Kerry and Defense Secretary has also ignored Pakistan during their recent visits of the region. Do you think it is due to the developing gulf between the two countries, or are there some other factors that are not in the spotlight at the moment?
I think that this administration, the Biden administration, is very focused on domestic concerns. First of all, dealing with the bringing to a close the pandemic, or at least the worst effects of the pandemic. Secondly, stimulating an economic recovery, dealing with issues of systemic racism and a whole range of things that could fall into the category of building back better after a year and a half of economic dislocation. And so I think that has been the priority for this administration, more than foreign affairs writ large. The focus for foreign affairs has been on rebuilding America's alliances, which were put under severe strain by the previous administration. And frankly, the core issue at an international level, the first issue is climate change, and then the second issue from a sort of geopolitical standpoint is dealing with an increasingly assertive China that is pursuing policies that are inimical to U.S. interests. And that is a real shift in U.S. policy. That's a tectonic shift in U.S. foreign policy that has happened over the last 5 years. It is bipartisan. In many ways, the Biden administration has accepted and embraced the concept of Indo-Pacific strategy, which was originally formulated, at least articulated, in the last administration. So I think all of these things are the priorities for this administration. They have a lot to do. They don't have all of their people in place yet. So I think I wouldn't overinterpret the perhaps lack of a high-level interaction between the heads of government and heads of state.
Ambassador, do you agree that the thriving relationship between Pakistan and China is becoming a major problem for United States, or becoming a major reason for United States to drift away from Pakistan? Do you believe that the increasing romance between China and Pakistan is a problem for United States?
Yeah, I think that there may have been more of an element of that in the previous administration. This administration is taking, I think, a slightly more nuanced view towards potential partners throughout the region. I think the view of this administration is that it wants to have a variety of partnerships, and some of them will be economic in nature, some of them will be perhaps more security focused. The primary security focused relationship in this part of the world is the Quad, which is the relationship between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, concerned with the security of the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. But I think there will be room for partnerships with various countries. In other words, I don't think that people in the high councils of government here in Washington are sitting around and saying, if a country has joined the Belt and Road Initiative, it is to be cast out and will not be dealt with. I don't think that's the realistic sense. And there's an understanding that for many countries, including potential partners, if faced with a choice between partnering with the United States and partnering with China, that we would not like the choice that the countries would make. So we are not generally making that a central part of our foreign policy, that one has to choose sides. That said, there are strategic choices that Pakistan and other countries will have to make. My own view is the likely area that will actually turn out to be quite important is the increasing digital divide in the world between those who go with the Chinese version of 5G, which involves technology from various companies that have been sanctioned by the United States and about which we have quite legitimate security concerns, and going with more Western options. This is a complicated choice, and I appreciate for certain countries it's going to be difficult because the Western choices are not so good right now, frankly, and China offers, frankly, a better package. So I think it's on us to offer a better package with regard to these kinds of initiatives. But I do think at some point there will be strategic choices that Pakistan, like every other country, will have to make.
Ambassador, do you see the significance of Pakistan for the United States purely from the prism of Afghanistan? I mean, is there a United States-Pakistan relationship beyond the Afghan factor?
I think it's important to recognize that the Afghanistan frame through which we have viewed Pakistan is likely to diminish over time. With the United States disengaging militarily, hopefully not diplomatically or in terms of development. I mean, it's important with regard to Afghanistan, we are not leaving and disengaging Afghanistan. We remain committed to supporting the government. President Ghani is coming to Washington this week, as is Dr. Abdullah. And so the U.S. is going to continue to support Afghanistan and the Afghan government, and hopefully in ways that are more robust now that we are no longer in the business of attempting to mediate between the Taliban and the government. So there will be some importance that the U.S. will continue to attach to Afghanistan for the foreseeable future. That said, I don't think it's going to be as dominant in framing the relationship with Pakistan. The other issue is that counterterrorism has receded from being the central issue in U.S. foreign policy, as it was for the first decade of this millennium, to an important issue, but one of not quite the same central concern. So both of these mean that that some of the bases for our relationship with Pakistan, for better or for worse, over the past 20 years are shifting. And the question is what will replace it. It is possible that the framing device, I mean, I'm just looking at this as an analyst, it is possible that the framing device will be China and the relationship with China. I think a more productive way to think about it, in which the government of Pakistan wants to frame the issue, is in terms of geoeconomics, in terms of economic opportunities in Pakistan, attracting foreign investment, attracting U.S. investments specifically. And I think that would be a more productive way to approach the relationship going forward. I would just note that it is, in order to do that, it is incumbent on the government to continue reforms that are needed. Pakistan has moved up the ease of doing business scale, the World Bank's ease of doing business, but it still has room to go. And so those are, but that is perhaps the most productive relationship that I think Pakistan can have with the United States at this point.
Ambassador, I have a tough question for you. Suppose Taliban make a an effort to take entire Afghanistan, and they try to take Kabul away from the current administration and try to make a central government. How United States do you believe will respond to such an eventuality?
Well, the Taliban have actually not negotiated seriously with the Afghan government. Ambassador Khalilzad set up a structure in the initial agreement with the Taliban, the US-Taliban agreement in February of 2020, the Doha agreement, under which there would be an immediate beginning of discussions with the Afghan government, between the Taliban and the Afghan government. And that would have given a year and a half, really, of negotiations before the deadline for the final US withdrawal. Now, what happened is the administration for which Ambassador Khalilzad worked decided to go ahead with troop cuts, even though they were not called for in the withdrawal agreement or in the Doha agreement. And I think that somewhat undercut the leverage of the government side. But the upshot is that the Taliban has never really come to the table and negotiated seriously about the core issues with the Afghan government. And I think that the position of the United States right now is that it is in Pakistan's interest to urge the Taliban to come to the table and negotiate. The United States, for better or for worse, is militarily disengaging, and as you say, Pakistan will bear the consequences. And as I say, Pakistan has had a relationship with the Taliban that goes back to its inception. So Pakistan is not without influence over the Taliban. Doesn't control the Taliban, but is not without influence. So it seems to us that Pakistan has an interest in getting the Taliban to come to the table. And Prime Minister Khan talked about this in his op-ed, his editorial today in the Washington Post. The fact that a Taliban government along the lines of the Emirate, so-called Islamic Emirate of the 1990s, is not really in Pakistan's interest. Pakistan's interest is in an accommodation of all Afghan factions, if you will. So I think it really is in the interest of Pakistan to pursue these negotiations. Now, the one thing I would say is it seems to me where the United States and others, especially the United Nations, should be focused is on the regional dimension. And it should be not entirely left to Pakistan, but it should be, this burden should be shared by all of the neighbors of Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for being in our program. It was such an honor and such a privilege for us to have you exclusively on Pakistan Television World. This was Mr. Richard Olson speaking exclusively to our program. And now from Islamabad, I have in my studio Ambassador retired Zamir Akram. He has remained Pakistan's special representative in the United Nations and has represented Pakistan on various diplomatic assignments in Moscow, Geneva, Delhi, and Washington, D.C. Ambassador Saab, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And we are going to talk about Pakistan and the United States relationship that is evidently on a downslide for last few years. How do you comment on that?
Well, I agree that it's been on a downward trajectory for several years. And the reason is that the US has actually blamed Pakistan for its failure to achieve a military victory in Afghanistan, which is, I think, in my view, an incorrect assertion. And it is also incorrect to use Pakistan as a scapegoat for American failure in Afghanistan. I think they failed because of their own mistakes, and we can go into what those mistakes were. But that is really the reason why it seems that there is a downward trajectory in our relationship. But that is the more immediate reason. I think there is a more broader and a more geopolitical explanation, and that is that for the last decade or so, or perhaps even more, global strategic environment has dramatically changed with a growing confrontation between the United States and China. And because of that, the US has moved towards building its strategic partnership with various countries in Asia, including with our neighbor India. And the Indo-US strategic partnership against China has had a negative impact on Pakistan and has also influenced the American attitude and approach towards Pakistan, given two things. One, are Pakistan-India tensions, and also the strong strategic relationship that have existed between Pakistan and China. So all of this has combined to create the current negative environment in Pakistan-US relations, in my view.
And do you believe this is primarily driven out of United States failure in Afghan conflict, that we have not seen formal communication between two head of the states so far?
Yes, I think that has a large part to play because, as I said, the US blames Pakistan for its failure, which is, I think, unjustified. But I think there is also a sense of, I would say, hostility by the American president towards Pakistan, which also explains his failure to contact and discuss or communicate with the Pakistani leadership, particularly with the Prime Minister. This hostility is driven again, as I said, by the fact that they think that Pakistan has brought them to a point where they are withdrawing from, they are actually retreating from Afghanistan without achieving what they think they have achieved. They claim they have achieved their goals, but they haven't. So I think this is really one of the reasons why there is this sense of animosity that is driving Biden in his attitude towards Pakistan.
In my interview with Mr. Richard Olson, he said that the Taliban have not taken the negotiations very seriously, and Pakistan has been the facilitator of these negotiations. Time and again, the United States reminds Pakistan that if Taliban are not coming on the table while the US military is on the go, Pakistan has to take some part of its responsibility. And Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Pakistan's foreign minister, has said that categorically many times that Pakistan will not take any responsibility for that. How do you comment on the situation?
Well, I think the first thing is that, as you have heard from various people in Pakistan, that Pakistan's role is that of a facilitator. It is not in a position to guarantee peace in Afghanistan. But even as a facilitator, we have tried to use our contacts with the Taliban as well as with the government in Kabul to make the necessary political compromises for a political solution in Afghanistan. And I don't agree with Mr. Olson's comment that the Taliban have been intransigent here, because I think both sides need to show flexibility. I would say that from the Taliban's perspective, they have honored the agreement that they reached with the US in February 2020. They have not attacked US withdrawing forces since that time. They have sent a delegation to Doha, and they have sent their delegations to various other forums for negotiations. But what they are saying is that the current Afghan government is a puppet regime installed by the United States, and they do not have a role in that government. So what they are asking for is that there has to be a transitional arrangement to begin with. There has to be a transitional arrangement in which all Afghans are stakeholders, which can decide the future political dispensation of Afghanistan. But we have seen that on the other side, that is the Ashraf Ghani side, they have tried to stall the process that began in Doha. Initially, if you remember, they did not agree to release Taliban prisoners, which was part of the agreement. They used other means to stall this process of naming the participants, etc. And now Mr. Ghani is, all that he is offering the Taliban is that they can have a share in his government. And that's really the sticking point, because it's not just the Taliban who reject this approach. Other Afghan stakeholders, other Afghan leaders, if you take Mr. Hamid Karzai or Mr. Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, even Mr. Abdullah and other Afghan leaders, they want a transitional government. They don't want to be a part of this setup with some minor ministries here and there. And that also reflects the ground realities. As you know, even before the Taliban started this occupation of several areas of Afghanistan, they were still controlling 1/3 of Afghan territory. Now their control has, they claim their control is over around 80–85% of the country. And they believe that, I think that the Taliban believe that having achieved this kind of control over the country, their representation in government must be commensurate or consistent with that, with the kind of hold they have over the country. So the ground realities need to reflect the realities of the Afghan government in future.
But Ambassador Saab, the venomous rhetoric of Afghan administration, as you might recently have seen the statement by Ashraf Ghani when he said this right on the face of Prime Minister of Pakistan, that Pakistan is providing support to Taliban, and they have not come out of their rhetoric so far. There was a very irresponsible statement by the Deputy President as well. Why do you believe they are not waking up to the reality, and why they have been dragging on with this venomous rhetoric? Are they not realizing the role that Pakistan is playing or is about to play in near future for the settlement of the peace process?
You know, the Afghan government and its functionaries are doing the same thing the Americans are doing, except sometimes the language that the Afghans use is rather unacceptable. But it's really blaming someone else for their own fault. The reason why the Taliban have been able to establish their control over such large parts of the country, the reason why Afghan army or Afghan police is surrendering in large numbers to the Taliban, and several places have come in under control of the Taliban without any actual fighting, is because the people of Afghanistan and even the forces, the military and police, have no confidence in the government in Kabul. And I think that's the kind of question that Mr. Ghani and others in his government should be asking themselves. Why don't their own people have confidence in them instead of blaming somebody else? Because even if what they claim is true, and it is not, even if what they claim against Pakistan is true, which I disagree with, the fact remains that we cannot influence the thinking of the people of Afghanistan. There is no way that we can convince the Afghan people that they should surrender to the Taliban, or that they should at least, or even flee from Afghanistan because they have no confidence in their own government. Now, as far as the comments that Mr. Ashraf Ghani made in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan and all that, I think this it just shows his desperation. Basically, he is desperate, he is isolated within his own country, and he needs somebody to blame for his predicament. And I think the Prime Minister's response was a very responsible and very statesman-like response, because he did not get into this harangue that Mr. Ghani came up with. Now, you know, when they say that Pakistan is giving shelter to the Taliban, and particularly their claim about the Taliban Shura in Quetta or in Peshawar or wherever. The fact of the matter is that there are more than 3.5 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan. These Taliban so-called Shura leaders are refugees. If you wish to take them back, you are welcome to take all of them back. You know? But I can also say with great confidence, because I know the facts, these same people, whether it is Mr. Ashraf Ghani or Mr. Hamid Karzai, because he used to be saying the same things, they all have properties in Peshawar, in Quetta, they have bank accounts in Pakistan, they have their own families living in Pakistan, and then they say that you are giving shelter to these people. We are giving shelter to all of them, and if they don't like it, then they should take them all back. We have no problem with the Afghan refugees going back to their home.
Sir, my last question. As you have been part of Pakistan's diplomatic mission in the United States during the most turmoiled times, you were there when you know, the nuclear explosion tests were done, and then you were there when the 9/11 happened. So based on this experience, I want to ask you, how do you foresee the relationship between Pakistan and the United States going forward with the boiling pot of Afghan turmoil is still simmering?
Well, I think if you look at the kind of regional situation, the situation in Afghanistan is going to take some time before it settles down, and it's very difficult to predict how it's going to settle. One thing, it's clear that if the narrow window that still exists for a political solution to be hammered out by the Afghans, if that does not happen, and if they don't show better sense, then a civil war or a renewed civil war is going to ensue in Afghanistan. In some ways you can say it has already started. Now, in that situation, I foresee the US actually blaming Pakistan. Again, just like their clients in Kabul are saying that you are supporting the Taliban, the Americans will say the same thing. This is what I foresee that they will do. A civil war in Afghanistan will also have a negative impact on our own security, because there will be places, white spaces in Afghanistan which are going to be used, which are still already being used by the TTP, by the Baloch Liberation Army people and other terrorist groups, not just against Pakistan but against China, the ETIM, against Iran, ISIS, Daesh, and against Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, the other neighbors of Afghanistan. So all of us, the neighbors, will have problems emerging out of this instability in Afghanistan, which we will have to take care of. And we are seeing this happening. I mean, I think that the attack against the Chinese in Dasu hydropower project, in my estimation, I don't have all the facts, but my guess is that it is an Indian sponsored terrorist attack, because they want to derail CPEC and the Pakistan-China relationship. Similarly, attacks in Balochistan, we have seen these, or in ex-Fata. So that's the regional part of it, and that foretells the kind of complications we are going to face with the United States as well. In the broader global scenario, I think that the growing confrontation, the US has moved from the containment of China to confrontation with China now. And in that scenario, the two factors that I earlier mentioned, the US support for India, particularly the military support for India, the strategic support for India, and the opposition to the China-Pakistan relationship by the US. These two factors will play a major role in our relations with the United States as well.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zamir Kram, for being in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back with the last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. And in the last segment of my program, I have with me Pakistan's former Foreign Minister, Mr. Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri, with me on the program. Kasuri Saab, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Kasuri Saab, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Kasuri Saab, we are discussing the evolution of Pakistan's diplomatic relationship with the United States. How do you see the foreign policy of United States in context of South Asia under Biden?
Well, I think it seems clear from actions. They say actions speak louder than words. The United States has now decided effectively, I don't know whether it will work out, but at the moment that seems to be their policy, to pull out of not just South Asia but also the Middle East and to focus on what they call the China sphere, the China front, or whatever you call it, and the South China Sea, East China Sea, and they're focusing there. And recently attempts were made to test China, and the effort, I think a NATO, a British ship also sailed past the area. So it's quite clear that America and its allies, or particularly the United States, I won't say Britain to that extent, has decided to focus only on China. I don't think it's a policy that's maintainable because the world is interlinked and it cannot work as President Biden may have in his mind. So, yes, it seems like it at the moment that South Asia, Middle East are low priority.
Kasuri Saab, if I understood you correctly, do you mean that the new world order for South Asia is today, to be decided with a relationship with or against China? Are we with China or against China? Is this the point of divide for United States to decide its alliance with different countries in the region?
The United States, particularly President Biden's administration, is probably slightly more sophisticated than the last administration under President Trump. They may put it in those words, but yes, those countries that are closer to China will find it difficult to have the sort of relation, for example, that Pakistan had in the past. Because Pakistan cannot sacrifice its relations with China. Our effort has always been to maintain good relations with both China and the United States. We have a history. Pakistan has been an ally of the United States for, since Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan visited Washington on the invitation of President Truman. So I think this is going to be challenged, but I think it largely depends on America. Pakistani Foreign Office is capable of handling this challenge. I headed the Foreign Office for 5 years. I know they are capable of doing it. But it depends also on what America wants. As they say, only two can tango. Pakistan's desire alone is not enough. Pakistan has always wanted a multifaceted relationship with China, with the United States, And even when I was foreign minister, we wanted that, and we succeeded. Because previous to that, there was a lot of criticism that Pakistan-US relations are only focused on security and military matters. But then we had the largest, we had other areas, and had the largest Fulbright program in the world. Thousands of scholarships were issued to Pakistanis to study. Then energy cooperation took place, and the other areas in which we were going. So we had upgraded the relationship when I left to ministerial level, and one had hoped under normal circumstances that the strategic dialogue between the two countries would raise to head of state, head of government level. That didn't happen. So it depends really on the United States how it would like to conduct, because from American perspective, if they are pulling out of this area, they should, if you look at it from American perspective, and if I were thinking, they should want a good, healthy, normal relationship with Pakistan.
Kasuri Saab, but it was that time when you were there in the office as Minister of Foreign Affairs that America's approach toward Pakistan became more Afghan-centric, and Pakistan's relationship with the United States has not been able to emerge any further thereafter. What do you think can be the reason for it? I mean, are you satisfied with the way Pakistan has played with the United States, or has kept the relationship with the United States while having the large presence of United States military in Afghanistan?
You see, as far as Pakistan is concerned, it was not just Pakistan. It was the whole world which made a choice, and that included Russia and China, who are considered as prime antagonists today after 9/11 events. Even they supported the United States, and India was dying to give its bases to the United States. I was not the foreign minister at that time. Mr. Abdul Sattar was, and you have to read his book to understand what the condition was. The public opinion in Pakistan was decidedly in favor of helping the United States, and he says in his book that 90% of the political leaders that President Musharraf interviewed, met, consulted with, said that we should go with the United States. All the Muslim countries were going with the United States. The situation was different, but we have learned and we have seen. We paid a huge price, 70,000 deaths from the resulting violence, the birth of the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan. So we paid a big price, and you learn from your experiences. I think Pakistani public opinion would never allow, for example, bases, even if America wanted, the United States saying that it didn't ask Pakistan for bases, but probably they did the right thing because they knew that no government in Pakistan could at this time, in view of the public opinion, agree to that. So I can't really blame Pakistan for that. United States is the superpower. It is one of the two superpowers since the emergence of China. Pakistan and the rest of the world after 9/11 were responding to situations rather than determining the situation.
Kasuri Sahab, my last question. You have recently heard Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan saying this categorically, that the right time for the United States to have conversation with Taliban was when they had 140,000 troops. Now when the United States military is on the go, perhaps the time is not very ripe to bring Taliban on the agreed terms as United States desire. How would you comment on this statement by the Prime Minister?
I think it is self-evidently correct. I mean, you don't even need arguments in his favor, because when you have 140,000 troops, you got something in your hands, you got cards in your hands you can negotiate with. You got nothing in your hands, so why should the Taliban listen to? They're not listening to United States, so why will they listen to Pakistan? So, I mean, that's self-evident that what the Prime Minister said, any reasonable person, any rational person, regardless of his political affiliation, if he were to think coolly, would agree with that statement.
Thank you very much, Kasuri Saab, for being the guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, the turmoil in Afghanistan is getting out of hands for all the regional powers. This is high time for the global powers to think how Afghanistan issue will be going forward and how will it be facilitated by the regional countries. If the regional countries are unable to play an important role, the spill-off effect of this Afghan crisis will affect every neighboring state. We'll join next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.